Guitar effects are powerful, iconic, and everywhere. The very thought of an electric guitar brings to mind distortion, fuzz, big growling amps, or wahs, flanges, and chorusing. Either way, the electric guitar is all about power and change, adapting sounds, finding new tones, or recreating old ones. These effects make rock genres identifiable. Each has its own uniqueness. Try listening to a song without the intended distortion. It doesn't sound right, does it? These effects are important to understand while learning about rock music, as they can help one understand the subgenres better, as well as recognize when an effect is used innovatively and/or creatively. In this video, I hope to give an insight into these effects, explain what they are, how they work, talk about some of the history of how they were developed or introduced to consumers. But before I start with this, I need to give background on how the guitar sounded before formal effects. Back in the day of big band jazz, guitars were background accompaniment, rather than the leading iconic instruments that we know today. They were quiet, uninteresting, and forgotten. The purpose in creating the electric guitar was simply to create a louder version of the acoustic guitar. It was still meant to be clean, but heard. But as the electric guitar came into use, guitars were given a new sound and a new role. Historians often paint the picture of early jazz guitarists turning their amps up all the way just to be heard in the loud crowded halls within which they played. At this point, they found that the signal distorted. The amps were unable to withstand the amplitude of the audio signal being raised so high, and what is called clipping occurred. This is the base concept of distortion. Though there were other ways to mess with the sound too. Stories are told of amps that were dropped, broken, rewired, had holes poked into, and even slashed with a blade in the case of Dave Davies from the Kinks. A fuzzy noise resulted from the breaking of these amps, whether done accidentally or intentionally. It was partially due to these experimentations that the guitar became so prominent as an instrument, changed the dynamic of band instrumentation. They could begin to compete with the power of the horn section, doing the job of a handful of players with just one instrument. Many historians point to Marty Robbins' single from 1961, Don't Worry, as the moment in which fuzz began its journey of usage inside a pedal. As the story goes, one of the tubes inside the soundboard for the bass's track broke, giving the bass a characteristic growl during its solo. The sound engineer, Glenn Snoddy, decided to keep it in the recording, even though Robbins reportedly did not like the sound, but the fans instantly fell in love with it, and other musicians began recording with this amp up until the point that it died. It was at this point that the Maestro Fuzztone F1 came into fruition. Snoddy, and another engineer he knew, created a box that would send the signal through a set of transistors. They took the box to Gibson, and it started being sold commercially. The first song to be recorded with the Fuzztone was the Rolling Stones hit Satisfaction. But even at this point, the box was only used for the demo, to emulate the horns that were planned to be in the recording. But the demo was released as the final track, and the tone was soon on the radio. Between the continued distortion of amps and the now popularization of fuzz, the electric guitar's characteristic sound became mainstream. But while iconic, fuzz was not the first commercially released guitar effect. Instead, tremolo was on the market first. Songs date back to at least 1942 with Roosevelt Sykes, where tremolo was experimented with on guitar. Muddy Waters and Bo Diddley are other pioneers of tremolo worth mentioning, recording songs using the effect in 1953 and 1955, respectively. Tremolo is defined as the pulsation of lowering and raising volume. Originally, the effect was designed for organs, but transitioned to be used by guitarists. Guy Armand's tremolo control is often given the title of the very first guitar effect, though it was still designed for electric pianos. He created its sound by using motors to rock a container of mercury back and forth. This is a type of sound control called bias modulation, which affects how much of the signal is physically fed to the amp. Leo Fender later created the method of signal modulation, which affects the signal itself. This method utilizes a low-frequency oscillator and is still used today. Echo is a much older effect. It was used as a post-production technique long before its debut as a guitar effect. Inside the studio, the tracker would be recording on 2 tapes, and then one would be played back, slightly delayed. It makes sense as to why the effect is normally called delay by most audio engineers. A transportable version of Echo was developed by Ray Butts, who sold his first Echosonic amp in 1943, and his second the following year to Chet Atkins. It was through one of these amps that Sun Records gained its distinctive slapback echo, notably on Elvis's early records. In the start of the 60s, the Echoplex, a more improved amp, made its debut. Both of these amps still utilized a tape delay method. The tape inside would play back almost instantly after being recorded on. But by the 70s, tapeless solutions began to be developed. Some used electrostatic fluids and magnetic discs, but the method that was most promising was the bucket brigade technology. This employed the use of capacitors that would delay the signal as it passed through them, eventually becoming known as analog delay. This analog delay was utilized in the electroharmonic stereo memory man and the MXR analog delay. Chorus is an effect somewhat similar to delay, originally utilizing multiple tapes. In this case, the second track varied in speed, moving the sound up and down in pitch. Originally, this was accomplished for organs by using the Leslie rotating speakers. This was composed of a set of horns that would spin inside a wooden box. The issue with these boxes is that they were large and heavy, resulting in them being difficult to transport. It was not until 1975, thanks to the aforementioned bucket brigade technology, that an electronic chorus effect was possible. It was then that Roland created the JC-120 jazz amp, notably used in the song Every Breath You Take by the Police almost 8 years later. A year after the JC-120, Roland took the chorus circuit and created a standalone model, the CE-1 Ensemble. On paper, flanger is an effect that is almost identical to chorus, again, raising and lowering speed to vary pitch, but with an even shorter delay time. The original practice had a finger ran over one of the tapes as it played, across the ring known as the flange, creating a whooshing effect. Some describe this noise as like an airplane jet. Many point to Les Paul as the first to use the method in 1945, though he does mention that he originally accomplished this with discs rather than tapes. John Lennon is attributed with coining the term, after having the sound engineer, George Martin, describe to him how the effect occurred. Although the Beatles began using it heavily in the mid-60s, notably in the song Tomorrow Never Knows, Jimi Hendrix's use of it in Bold as Love in 1967 may be one of the most characteristic uses of a flanger. Just like with chorus, using a flanger was not possible outside of the recording studio until the bucket brigade technology was developed. While not necessarily the first on the market, the 88 flanger from 1977 was without a doubt the most well-known version of the effect. And there were many more influential effects too. Reverb was originally recorded using giant metal containers or empty rooms, but a live effect was developed in 1961 through the use of springs. Vibrato is often confused with tremolo due to manufacturers using the two terms incorrectly, though it is often created electronically through the use of tremolo circuits. Wahs are an increasingly expressive effect pedal that was developed as we know it in 1966, though versions existed as early as 1961. Overall, these effects have been the resulting of experimentations and breakthroughs in technology. Each became more accessible as the technology became greater. None of these innovations would have happened had engineers and artists alike not experimented and tried to create music in new ways. All of these effects grew right alongside rock music, as a significant part of it. They allowed the electric guitar to become what it is today, giving it vast and ever-growing possibilities. Guitar effects allow bands to create their own unique sounds, help genres form, and add recognizable character to rock music.